I'm making progress. James, thank you.
Great music.
Famous James Johnson. Man, you don't have to wait out in the wings. Well, you can come here and then we'll switch out.
Yeah.
You're the star of the show here.
Hi, everybody.
Ed, you wanna?
Welcome. We love it when Jay brings good people here. I always say this, it brings the spirit to this home that sticks and it helps. Yeah. So we really love good spirits that you bring and it feels good to be people like you all and we all welcome. There's a restroom in that corner and a restroom right here in the hall and welcome.
Thank you so much, Ed. Kristen, where's Kristen go?
We're finishing up, we're teaching
Oh,
an English class
you guys do a lot of good.
online.
Ed teaches in schools and then they teach together and you serve in a Spanish branch.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys do lots of good stuff. Yeah. That's it. Oh, Kelsey, these are all huh?
Will you ask if people on Zoom can hear you?
People on Zoom. May you hear? Can you hear? Hear me now?
I asked in the chat, but nobody's answering.
Hello.
Oh.
Oh yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's get through some formalities here. Jane, thank you for doing the Zoom group. Appreciate that. And Faith Matters is who pays for the Zoom. Grateful for them doing that. They had the Restore conference. Actually, they have a Wayfair conference coming up in a couple of weeks, which I think is free. Let me know if you want to go to that. Those are really lovely. A lot of wonderful art, poetry, and music, and really fun stuff. A lot of good scholars, so to speak. Let's see, who is here for the first time? Josh? Becky? No, Becca, sorry.
Rebecca?
Becca and Rebecca. Yes, sir. You too?
Oh, first.
Yeah, first time.
And
Danielle.
Andrew and Danielle.
Danielle.
Cool. And then you two again, remind me?
Cliff.
Cliff.
That's me.
I thought you say notes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Bad joke. Sorry. That was bad. Hey, welcome. Have a seat. Oh yeah. Haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, I'm Sean.
That's Sean. You still have your podcast?
I had a master's degree and get in the way of it, but I just so maybe I should pick that back up.
It's 50 years. You know, I haven't seen some. So we have Cynthia Woodward, and I'm sorry, your husband's name? Paul. I know you're probably used to that. Huh? Everyone knows Cynthia, but not Paul. And Cynthia, you have your podcast. Want to just briefly talk about that in the new book?
Oh no, we're gonna talk about.
I know, but just real briefly. Real briefly.
Our podcast, my podcast is at Last You Said It. We just have our book out. We just finished our 3-state book tour. We'll hit.
And we is your
My podcast partner, Susan Hinckley. But she lives in Arizona and Minneapolis. So
What's the name of the book?
it's same as our podcast. At Last You Said It. It's just good old LDS feminist
good stuff.
essays. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Very good stuff. Yeah, I've had them come and do Faith again before. Let's see. Well, I want to thank everybody that's come to this. Thank you, because it's a much better group the more people we have that participate. So this is wonderful. And Matt, of course, we wouldn't be meeting about this topic without you. So thank you. And Jed, you brought some books from his prior book, his book about Ezra Benson, right? Yeah. So we have second class saint books here, and Matt's happy to sign that book or the other book about Ezra Benson. Or if you brought a book, I guess you bring any book, you'll sign it. But if it's written by him, that's probably better.
Yeah.
And Jed, you're what's your position? University of Utah Press?
Yeah, I heard.
Okay, that's why you brought the books. Jed's a fellow trail runner. Done runs together, he's a great guy. And then you two. Introduce yourselves.
So-
It's so long.
Wendy Smith, and it's been a few years since we've been, but yeah, long time friends with the Griffiths and we've been blessed to be in Ed Kristen's house before for a few things.
Took Matt to bring him back out again.
It's true. We've been admiring your work from afar, so good to see you in person.
So Spencer and Jameis are friends. Spencer is actually, you're the grandson of President Hinckley?
One of them.
One of them? Yeah, stories to tell too. And I invited, forgetting his first name, Kimball. Chris, yeah, because I've had him come before, but.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Did you
What?
think, Jamie?
I did thank James.
Okay,
But I'll thank
maybe
you
I'm
again.
busy.
No, I did it on the front end.
Okay.
So anyway. Let's see. So for those who are here for the first time, we've been meeting since 2013, December of 2013. Once a month. They're not always religious topics, not always LDS topics, but I do tend to get more people when it's religious angst and things like this. Than other secular topics I'm interested in, but you know, it's okay. Let's see, and so I just keep in mind, this is an inclusive place where you can share your heart and mind. It's not like Sunday school where you have to be afraid of what you're going to say. But you know, we ask you to think about being kind. Just in general, and all of you that I know. Hey, Carly. Carly's an out-of-stater.
Not anymore.
Oh, really? Welcome back.
You tired?
Now you're back in Utah. Well, welcome back. Good to have you. So anyway, but feel like you can speak frankly. And, you know, respect where me, I guess I run this, but everybody that comes to this group respects each other and where your journey is taking you. And that may take you out of the church, and that's okay. You know, this isn't trying to be apologetic. This is trying to be a place where we journey together, trying to find truth. And, you know, as an active member, I would love to have you keep helping me help the church be better. But if that's not what you feel called to do, then please do what you feel called to do, you know, and that's okay. It's hard for me to imagine that God wants all of us in this church, because I can't make sense of that. You know? And I've had too many experiences with good people outside the church to know that God seems to be interested in everybody equally. So, Jameis, do you remember I was going to have you do that little Mormon boy song that you put together? Can you do that real quick? That'd be fun. And then I did not think to ask if somebody to give an invocation. Cynthia, would you do that?
Oh, sure.
Thank you. And then, as I tell everybody every time, sometimes people do it. Sometimes you can say Mother in Heaven. That's great. I'm happy with that. So, but you pray however you're comfortable.
Got it.
You don't have to say anyway. You don't want to. So that's a little fun ditty that Jameis put together.
Well, his brother she'll sing himself, like something more spiritual, but also Lorena knows that song that you wanted to sing at the end. So.
Okay, cool.
Oh, boy.
Working okay?
Yeah. I need a lot of help.
Okay. Jameis is legally blind, and you never would know that. It's just
Okay,
amazing.
this is a song that was sung as the Mormons crossed the plains. And they were, basically saying, let's look temptation squarely in the face. And tell Satan to be quiet. You see those hand cards? Well, a red-handed woman takes me out. She said, love me tonight, forget your Lord one time, so get fine, say, travel all down that line. God, come on, a good morning, boy, and get behind. Hey, Jenkins, the sugar dog.
Yeah.
Well, boss walks around with $5 bill, and said, take some whiskey. You go, Bill, I said, get behind the seat, travel on down that line, so we do. Walk about a good morning, boy, and get behind. Well, politicians come on election day, oh, Donald Trump, please your pay. Get behind the state, travel on down that line. Walk about a good morning, boy. And get behind. Now about this time, some left the guitar player recently, I should have some things up here playing.
This is on the plane, it's coming out, right?
Yeah. Well, we have tonight, said love me tonight, forget your Lord one time as a kid.
Everybody.
Travel on down that line, shippy-doo-wah, cause I'm a good morning boy. And get me behind.
Oh, Jameis, that's so much fun. Let me make sure I'm up to speed here with things. Okay, so I think we're about ready to begin here. So again, tonight, after I listened to Mormon Stories, did a separate podcast series, 17. I listened to that, and that's what put me onto this. And then I got Matt's book, listened to it, and then I had to reach out to Matt because this was just such interesting things to think about in terms of revelation, in terms of institutional revelation, and also in terms of how we receive our revelation. So the main topic that second class saints is kind of bridging into is that topic of what is revelation, how does it work, and how do we get it, both institutionally and personally. And Matt is going to start out, kind of laying some groundwork for that. And then fortunately, he loves to do questions. And so most of the time will be questions, discussion, which is what we do normally anyway, but appreciate Matt being willing to do that. So here, take the pad chair.
All right.
And we'll turn the time over to you. Oh, wait,
Not
and
the
that's
prayer.
Cynthia. Yeah, say a prayer. Cynthia's gonna say a prayer. Thank you, Suzanne. This way. Yeah, you can come up. Yeah, come up here. That's better. Have you come up? I think I would be better at this after that many years. I'm not, but hello.
Our dear God in heaven, we're grateful to be here as friends tonight, as curious thinkers, to be in this home, and grateful to hear from Matt Harris about his amazing book that has touched so many of us and help us to listen well, to learn, to have thy spirit with us, and to enjoy each other's company. And we say this in the name of thy son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right, Matt. Go for it.
Well, thank you for allowing me to be here today. It's my these are the settings that I enjoy the most. I talk a lot to a lot of different groups, and this is some of the most enjoyable for me are ones in intimate settings like this, where I asked Jay and I asked my friend Jed over there. I said, "All right, tell me about this group. Do I need a filter?" And anyway, so I do like to be myself and to talk openly about these kinds of things. And I spoke recently about this book to second class saints, to the BYU religion department. And when they invited me, my first thought was, did they get permission to bring like me in? And so I'm going across campus, my alma mater, and I'm going into the Joseph Smith building where they're at. I thought to myself, I can't imagine that somebody on the faculty has gone rogue by inviting me. But that's not my problem. There I am. And anyway, so I get there to the room I'm supposed to be, and I thought it was strange that the administrative assistant, two of them actually, they ran out. Brother Harris, we're happy you're here. It's interesting, hugging these ladies, I don't know. And I thought, okay, that must mean it's legit because they're giving me hugs and telling me welcome. And then the dean came around the corner, guy that I know well and I'm friends with, and he said, "We're so happy to have you here, Matt. And we bought second-class saints for our faculty." And I thought, I can't imagine that tithing dollars are better spent than buying second-class saints. And so anyway, it was gratifying to be there because this is a tough book, because some of you have read it already or maybe heard some of the podcasts. And I think some of you know, if you've heard me speak before, I don't hold back, I don't sugarcoat, always respectful, but I don't sugarcoat. And so it was fun to talk about with the religion faculty about things that are on their minds as they teach race and some of the challenging issues. And I'm happy to, if you want to ask later on what questions they ask me, I'm happy to entertain those questions. Yeah, but it made me happy because it let me know that they know it's important to teach their students at a deeper level than what they're currently doing. That the stuff that Desert Book is churning out, and not here, not Desert Book, but it's not really intellectually deep. And the church correlated manuals are not really serving that purpose because so many kids have deep issues about race and all of that. And so they're turning to my book and some other things out there, and that makes me happy. Anyway, so a couple things about me. I decided to do a book on Ezra Taft Benson. I guess in 2020 it came out, and I didn't realize that that book would be an interesting thing because of the MAGA stuff. I got all these MAGA Mormons contacted me. Like, wait a minute, the Benson book doesn't talk about you at all, nor your cult leader. And but it came out just, but you know, if the shoe fits, you wear it, right? And it came out a month before the election, and I have Jed's colleagues to blame for this. They're the ones that published it. And, you know, naive me didn't think about September of 2020, so just before the election. Anyway, and then I did Second-Class Saints, and we'll talk about it tonight. And right now I'm knee deep in a biography on Hugh B. Brown. And some of you of a certain generation in this room knows who Hugh B. Brown is. And I always tell people, he grew up in Canada. His formative years were in Canada. And like many Canadians, he's a socialist. And he gets to be part of a church leadership full of Republicans from Utah, Idaho, and Arizona. So Canadian socialist in a church hierarchy full of men from the American West. What could go wrong? And if you think some of them had issues with Brother Brown in the first presidency, wait till they call his nephew, Eldon Tanner, to join him as second counselor in 1963, another Canadian socialist. And Cleon Skousen, whose journals I have, flew to the moon when he found out that it wasn't his close friend Benson who was supposed to be good. It was this Canadian socialist named Tanner. So anyway, the church, it's falling apart. Anyway, couple things about Second-Class Saints, and I really do enjoy engaging you and listening to your questions, and I'm happy to, you can ask follow-up questions and you'll see where we want to go with things. But the first question I'm frequently asked is, why did you do this book? And it builds off a second book, or a first book that I did in 2015 called Mormons and Blacks, A Documentary History. And it's a book that that looks at seminal primary sources with deep contextual essays talking about why these documents are really important. For example, Mormon Doctrine in 1958, there's a deep contextual essay about why it was written, the challenges, the controversies of that book. So that was 2015. And I realized that, as any good author knows, that you compile a research record and maybe 15% gets into the book. So now I have 85% taking up space in my home. And I knew that I wanted to tell a deeper story into the 20th and 21st centuries, which is what Second-Class Saints is. The first book is 1830 to the present, just kind of runs the gamut. But this one, I really want to go behind the curtains and do a detailed story about not just what the brethren are saying about the ban, but also how does it affect Black people and brown people and white people, for example. When you grow up in this church and you're conditioned to see Black people as an inferior soul, that does affect you. And I also wanted to look at civil rights groups. I mean, think about this for a minute. here we have in Utah, the state run by Mormon legislatures. The legislature of the 1950s is 90% LDS, no surprise. And the church doesn't support civil rights. But think about this for a minute. Church doesn't support civil rights because the Mormon legislature are conditioned to see Black people as sons of Cain. Why would you want to be working with people who are deemed cursed? Think about that, right? And the fear, of course, is interracial marriage. If you allow Black people to come into your workspace or to build the next condo over, that creates an intimacy that the church is comfortable with. So I wanted to look at what civil rights leaders are thinking about Mormon theology, some of whom are LDS, most of whom are not LDS. What are they saying about this? And so there's a lot of different moving parts in this story that I wanted to look at. I also wanted to look at theology a little bit and what's unique about Mormon theology. I mean, most of us in this room know that our faith tradition is not unique when it came to biblical curses. Protestants, Jews, and Catholics were doing this. But certainly our faith tradition is unique in tying it into a premortal life. This is uniquely Mormon. And that's a later theological development in the late 19th century. So, and then we sort of get more interesting rationales throughout the 20th century. My favorite is in 1970, why was there a ban? We don't know. Really? We know the answer to everything else except why God, punished millions of his own children. So, I mean, so as a historian, I contextualize these things. That ridiculous line came about. Told you to take my filter out tonight.
They didn't say that at BYU?
Well, I say a lot of things at BYU.
It's right
It's right
here.
here.
It's right here.
Yeah, there's one,
Right.
there's one right there, and
Oh.
there's a second, I had to put one there.
Okay, so
That's okay, my wife put one there too.
I'm careful what I say to lots of people. But anyway, I've always thought that the whole premortal existence thing was nonsense, because really what you're saying is you're penalizing somebody else for a multi-generational curse. And that's in violation of the Articles of Faith. And for me, it's easy for me and you to figure that out, right? But are the brethren making that connection, that this is incongruous with Mormon theology? And when you get other examples of generational curses, you get examples of the children or the covenant with Israel, right? Black people are cursed, so they're outside of the covenant. That's an interesting theological concept, because now that when they wanted to lift the ban in the 1970s, and I can get into the weeds of that and maybe during Q&A, they needed a new theology to accommodate these sweeping changes. And the theology prior to that, to the ban being lifted, was Black people cannot be adopted into the house of Israel. That was the theology. And then after 1978, Elder McConkie goes to the church president and he says, let's adopt them into the house of Israel. And President Kimball says, okay, let's do it. Without even giving it any thought at all, but recognizing that if you're outside of the covenant with this biblical curse, you have to be brought in through adoption. And
You're talking about Bruce Armstrong.
Bruce R. McConkie. And Elder McConkie said something interesting that I found that not surprising, because it's Elder McConkie, but he said that everybody has a little bit of the blood of Israel in them, except for Negroes. So he's positioning Black people in this different sphere.
Hey man, I should say, where are you, Sam? Sam, you are what relationship to Bruce?
Bruce is my great uncle.
Yeah, great uncle.
Thanks. Now I have to.
Sam's,
Got it.
yeah, Sam's a free thinker.
No, it's all good. Anyway, so I did this book. I wanted to tell this detailed story that was really important to me, but I like to work with sources that are, I always use the Thanksgiving metaphor. As a historian, I like to work with the turkey, not just the trimmings. And the turkey would be the first presidency meeting minutes and the Quorum of the 12 meeting minutes, diaries, letters. That's how I do business. And the trimmings would be, the Ensign article or the Deseret News coverage. That's important stuff, right? The sermons, that's important, but you need the turkey. And so I've been privileged to see the turkey in my life. And I saw it with this book here. And I'm seeing it with the Hugh Brown papers that I'm doing now. I have all of his private papers, diaries, letters, meeting minutes. And so let's transition now just for a second about how I get access to all this stuff, because I know you want to know this. And there's a couple of ways that I do it. Sometimes you just go into the church archives and you say, hey, let me see it. And they say, no. And then I've got, you know, a little archivist friend around the corner. Hey, the minute attention, I'll bring you what you need. Yeah, no, that's the olden days. This guy no longer works there. I've been asked so many times, how did you get access to the Joseph Fielding Smith papers? Well, my friend, the archivist. Oh, we know who you're talking about.
The one that's no longer there.
Well, he did not get fired for
Oh,
giving me
good.
stuff. Yeah, just to be
That's
clear, he retired. He was in his 60s, but just a wonderful guy. I would go in there in research collections of the church archive, and he would come out frequently and say, Matt, I've got something you've got to see. He puts it right in front of me. I'm thinking, I love you. And so anyway, I asked to see material and build trust with archivists. That's always an important thing. But the main thing that I've done over the years is I've worked with the adult children of general authorities. So when the brethren die, obviously their family, two things that happen to their papers. One is they dictate, it goes to the church archives and it just goes there and it's not seen. Since you can see old stuff now, like old stuff, 1900, but recent stuff in the last 80 years off limits. So it goes to the archives. That's one option. The other option is it goes to the archives, but the family requests that copies are made. And so for me, I get a chance to go work with the families who have copies. And when I wrote Second Class Saints, I had a lot of stuff that I had been accumulating over the years. And one of the sources that was really important for me was President Kimball's papers. I just did not want to do this. That's the turkey, really. But I got access to other Benson and Hugh Brown and Joseph Fielding Smith. But President Kimball, the guy who's so instrumental in doing what he did, his leadership. And so I met with Ed Kimball. I remember calling his son Ed Kimball, and some of you may know that Ed's not just the son, but he's his dad's confidant. He's also his dad's presidential biographer. So Ed wrote 2 biographies of his late father. So he's more than just a good son who goes fishing and his dad talks. He was invested in this story. And so I called up Ed one day and made some small talk. And I said, for lack of a better word, I said, Ed, I want to see your dad's diaries. Now think about this for a moment. A stranger asked me to see the family jewels. It's like, why should I give them to you? Because you're a nice guy. And so we had a long talk on the phone, several long talks about my approach to history. What will you do with this? And these are all legitimate questions. I don't know if I would be as generous. I haven't kept a diary in a while, but I don't know if I would be as generous with a stranger that Ed was with me. Because you don't just see what your research topic is. You see family spats, you see stillborn births, you see, in Ed's case, the older brother grew out a ponytail back in the 50s and Spencer goes in there, you know, Elvis Presley on the wall and, you know, the world's falling apart in the Kimball home because, you know, the king is on the wall. And so you see lots of fun things. But so Ed, after 3 lengthy phone calls, he invited me to his home in Provo, and he lives right near the old Provo temple. I guess it's raised now. And I think neither of us realized what my coming over would mean. It was just, you know, I'm on trial, I'm getting interviewed. That's really what it is. And so anyway, 9 hours later and 2 meals later, my wife is like, where are you? She's from Provo. And so my wife said, when did you pass the interview? And I said, I think about 40 minutes in. And anyway, Ed's whole demeanor just kind of went relaxed and realized, I think he knew already from the phone, but realized I could be trusted with his family's papers. And these aren't just diaries, by the way, these are meeting minutes. A lot of church presidents and apostles put meeting minutes in their diaries. I love that. Because most of the meeting minutes were in the vaults in Salt Lake and they're total off limits. So I get a lot of meeting minutes that I quote, and you'll see my work where it says meeting minutes. Those are usually from private collections where they kept me copies of the meeting minutes. And in Hugh Brown's case, Hugh Brown, loved that man, kept he kept carbon copies of everything, every record. And so all the originals are in the archives that are off limits. And then all the carbon copies that I have are because he was so fastidious in keeping records. But anyway, so Ed Kimball, we had this lovely talk. I shared my ideas about his book, or my book, course, it's not written yet. This is 2013, folks. So this is a long time ago. And Ed unfortunately did not live to see the publication of my book, and I regret that. But I did share my thesis with him. And the thesis was, I said, your dad was going to lift the priesthood or the band the minute he became the president. I said, critique, go. And Ed looked at me and he said, what do you want me to critique? Now, Ed wrote a book, and if some of you have read that, you might recall that's not the story Ed tells, because he made the fatal mistake of publishing a desert book. And anyway, and then I gave Ed my evidence about why his dad was going to critique the ban. And this will segue into Revelation. And the idea that President Kimball wanted to critique the ban the minute he became the church president in December of 1973 was born out of the fact that he had been struggling with the ban for a long time. And one of the biggest revelatory moments that I had as a scholar was seeing his diaries and others, where they see up close and personal how the ban affects Black people, where you get Black Latter-day Saints from Brazil or anywhere else in the world coming to these apostles as they're visiting their stakes and wards. And they're coming out. This is Elder Kimball in 1965. This is Sao Paulo, Brazil. A Black man comes up after Elder Kimball spoke at the state conference. And he said, Elder Kimball, all I want to do is get married in the temple and be sealed to my wife and children. Why can't I? You know, and what do you say? Because you're cursed and less valiant. I mean, you know, that's just so inhumane. And he didn't say that, by the way. All he did was just express sympathy. And he goes home and he writes about it in his diary that night. This good brother is Taiping. He serves in a limited capacity in the ward. Limited because there are some callings that Black people can serve in, but not others. So he's having this gut-wrenching moment in his diary where he knows his ban is wrong. And same with young Black teenagers. And these Black kids are coming up and they're saying, you know, they don't use the word white, but they're basically saying our core members who are white are preparing to serve missions. All we want to do is serve the Lord too. Why can't we? And so Kimball goes home and he's just like, oh my goodness, this is awful. It's wrong. I mean, he has this moment where it's wrong. And so also in I was seeing President Kimball's scriptures. I quote them in St. Class Saints. I've seen his scriptures from 1954. I was in a rare book store in Orem, and I met the bookseller. He's like, I heard you're a scholar. You might want to see President Kimball's scriptures. They're going to interest you. And I said, you know, whenever someone says that to you, you should take them up on it. And so he brought him out. And anyway, for my purposes, so this is 1954. He's an apostle. Elder Kimball is circling skins of Blackness and traditional rationales from the scriptures that leaders have used over the years. And he circles them and he'll put Negro in exclamation point. He's having this intertextual dialogue where he doesn't believe in any of these traditional interpretations. And I saw that and I was just blown away by that. 1963, Elder Kimball writes his son, Ed, my friend. And so Ed would have been a law professor in Wisconsin at this time. And President Kimball, Elder Kimball, I guess, told his son, he said, the ban may have been a possible error. This is 1963. 1969, Elder Kimball teams up with Hugh V. Brown to ordain a Black man to the priesthood. This is 1969. So they almost pull it off, and then Harold Lee gets wind of it. And so,
Do you mean McKay? Is President McKay?
yeah, President McKay, now he's 95. He is not lucid at all. And Hugh B. Brown, the McKay sons, Eldon Tanner's part of this, Spencer Kimball's part of it. They convince President McKay that it's time to lift the ban. Now he's 95, he's not doing well mentally, but he agrees to do it. And they even selected a faithful African-American brother at the Hotel Utah, worked for the church. He knew the brethren. His name was Monroe Fleming. And so they had selected him as the first recipient of the Melchizedek priesthood. And then guy named Alvin Dyer, who was in the first presidency, got word of what was going on, contacted Harold Lee, who was in the hospital. And I have this really weird image in my mind that Harold Lee with his hospital gown rose up out of his bed and went running down to President McKay. But anyway, they put a stop to it. And that's the context in which President McKay or President Kimball wanted to lift the ban when he became the president. And I get people all the time it's hard to learn new things when you have a traditional narrative in your head the church has put out for so many years. And I get people all the time, and they'll ask, well, President Kimball was praying and praying and praying and praying. And I said, yeah, he was praying, but it's the details of what he's praying for. He wasn't saying, dear God, should I lift the ban? He was saying, dear God, help me to connect with Elder McConkey to get him to see that it's time to lift the ban. That's what he's praying for.
And Packer and.
And
I mean, a lot of them, most. Yeah. Yeah, I know.
If you guys haven't read the book, I just spilled it myself. I'm not incontinent, I promise. We had this great speaker, he couldn't help himself. Anyway, so Revelation is, and I'll make this the last comment, is that Revelation is one of the things that I wanted to really emphasize in this book is that Revelation is active, it's not passive. It's not, as President Kimball said, it's not lying on the couch at night with your feet up and somehow God's just going to talk to you. Not to say that you can't get inspired with those kinds of things, but institutional revelation is different than personal revelation, where God is sending messages or inspiring you to do something. Institutional revelation is consensus. Doctrine and Covenants 107. That means the top 15, the top 2 quorums of the church have to agree to it. From an organizational perspective, it's probably not very efficient because it takes one person to thwart the revelation. And Hugh B. Brown said revelation, he said it is probably as well as anybody. He said, when we have a problem, we debate it, the 12 in the first presidency, we debate it, we thrash it out, we argue. Those are words he uses: argue, thrash out, debate. And then we reach a consensus, and then we pray once there's a consensus, and the president then stands and says, I feel to say this is a revelation. That is so different than June 1st, 1978, where President Kimball just had this epiphanous moment and God said, spur of the moment, let's lift the ban. The truth is that narrative is not sustainable because President Kimball had been working both individually and collectively with the brethren for, by that point, 5 years. He knew he was going to lift the ban. And so I was a little disappointed. I would never say this publicly on a podcast, I don't think. But I was disappointed when the Saints Volume 3 came, is it 4? 3 or 4, the last one? 4. When Saints 4 came out, because they really talked about how to tell, they read my book, and they didn't know if they wanted to go back and change the revelation part. But if you read it, they wanted to keep their publication schedule. And if you read it, it just simply regurgitates standard traditional narrative that President Kimball showed up on June 1st. They had this wonderful moment, and there it was. When the truth is that he had been agitating for change for several years prior. And if you guys get into my book, you'll know that the first person that he targeted for the change was Elder McConkey, because he knew that he couldn't get the other brethren to fall in line unless he got the church's foremost doctrinal authority first, because what McConkey said mattered. And so when he got Elder McConkey to come on board, I'd like to think it was all downhill from there, but he still had Ezra Taft Benson, Del Stapley, and Mark Peterson. And on June 1st, 1978, those are the 3 apostles that were still digging their heels in. How's that for an intro? All right.
Talk briefly about the other agitators, though. I mean, it wasn't just President Kimball. There was stuff outside the church. Just briefly touch on some of those things that made it, I mean, trying to open a mission in Brazil and BYU and sport. I mean, there's just so many things. The devil and AACP. I mean, there's the church, you quote these people's diaries and they're just struggling with the bad press and all these things going on. I mean, you had President Kimball doing his thing, but there was a whole other world of stuff going on too. Just touch on that real quick.
Yeah, I think, yeah, thank you. I think that, so a couple thoughts. I think most of you guys, if you've ever had any classes in race or racial history or sociology of race, you know that race is a construct. Just to put that in just plain English, it just simply means after the American Civil War that lawmakers wanted to create racial markers to keep Black and white people separate. And they couldn't figure out how to define a Black person. So lawmakers literally sat around tables like this and used fractions to define a race. So in Virginia, you're considered Black if you're 1/32nd. In North Carolina, it's 1/16 for us. So you have this racial fluidity. You could be white in one state and black in the next. I mean, it's complete nonsense. And most of you guys know in this room, or maybe if you do genealogy, you'll know that if you go back 200 years, 10 centuries, not very long, that each of us has one indigenous ancestor and one black ancestor. Some of us more, but each of us has that. And so race is a construct. And do the brethren know this? The answer is yes. There's a Columbia University anthropologist who's doing some really important work on this. His name is Franz Boas. He's a German guy who moved to the United States. And Hugh Nibley, Lowell Benyon, Latter-day Saint thinkers, they're reading Franz Boas, and they're telling the brethren, hey, this whole race thing, this whole one drop thing that we use to determine who's got the curse, this is all nonsense. And so what happens with that is the brethren, like Americans in general, they don't know how to police racial boundaries. It's just lost on them. So the more interesting thing is they get word from Brazil and other multiracial countries that they're conferring priesthood ordination on people who have African ancestry. They know this is going on. And depending on which authority general apostle you talk to, when they find it out, they'll tell the brother, I'm thinking of a branch president in Brazil, they tell the brother to stay your hand. You can perform your priesthood ordinances at home, but you can no longer do it in a branch capacity. And let you figure out why you can do it at home. Well, that's beyond my pay grade. And then he gets released, and then they put him back in there because his whole branch falls apart. Because newsflash, people in Brazil don't care about race like the brethren do. It's multiracial. It's the last state in the Western world to get rid of slavery, 1888. So they grew up with multiracial marriages. And so anyway, and then other times with the brethren, an apostle hears about it, and they're like, why are you telling me? I don't want to hear about this. Because we need you. We need you to serve in this priesthood function. So I don't want to release you. And so it's a rat race. And so they used to have genealogy. They had young 19 and 20-year-olds try to trace genealogy, some prospective convert. You know, what could go wrong there? A 19-year-old young man who's an expert in genealogy. You know, also too, jokes aside, this is South Africa, the late 1940s. I mean, think about the wonderful things the church has done with genealogy today. They don't have any of this at their disposal in the 1940s, early 50s. So there's a genealogy issue. There's pressure that's put on the church from the Internal Revenue Service, that the brethren are really worried about the IRS in the 70s. And I've had some podcasters really pepper me with this because they're really reaching for a secular explanation to describe, you know, what's going on. And I write about the IRS at great length in this book because it's there, it's in the room. But I've told various people, I said, you can't argue it's the IRS for two reasons. Number one, it undercuts my thesis that Kimball wants to live it the whole time. And I'm just vain enough to not want to concede it. But jokes aside, there's no evidence for it. There's absolutely no evidence for it, except the church historian Leonard Arrington writing in his diary and later his memoirs that he heard from a church attorney that the church was worried about losing its tax exemption status in Wisconsin and Hawaii. That's the evidence that we have. And I quote this in my book. Now, isn't Leonard Arrington good enough? He's a great guy. The answer is that in Wisconsin, they were talking about revoking the tax exemption status of institutions that discriminated. And that did not become a law until 1981, 3 years after the revelation. Hard to argue cause and effect when it's 3 years later. Also, too, the person that told Arrington that was a person who works for Curtin McConkie. Now imagine this. I think somebody said there's a lawyer in the room.
That's James.
Okay.
But Sam's father's a lawyer.
Couple of lawyers.
So if you're a McConkie, he comes from the McConkie.
Okay. So
You have
looking
to
at
be
you,
an attorney.
McConkie.
You have to be an attorney if you're gonna.
Okay, so it works for. So this guy works for Curtin McConkie, this lawyer, LDS lawyer, and he goes to Gerald and Sandra Tanner after he's meeting with the Curtin McConkie law firm and telling the Tanners, you know, the IRS is on the church. I mean, he's admitting these or divulging these confidential things, which is just crazy to think about it, right? But he's devolving this, and in 1979, Gerald and Sandra Tanner published this IRS thesis in their newsletter. And as a scholar, that to me is more interesting as how this IRS thesis gets going than, because there's no evidence of any of this stuff. And Jimmy Carter put pressure on the church to look. I wrote Jimmy Carter a letter, is this true? Did you do this? He wrote back a nice letter. He said, no, I didn't, but I knew about the ban and I didn't like it. But I didn't use the IRS to put pressure, because only Trump would do that. Yeah.
I have a question that's
Sure.
theory. You mentioned that, the Canadians had a different sort of perspective. And I have this theory that the Arizona Saints did. My people are from the Southwood Thatcher area.
Oh,
And my great grandfather was in the state presidency with President Kimball's father, and they were in charge of the Mexican Saints as well.
nice.
And they were all Democrats. They were union people. Father was a union member. And then you have some notable Democrats from there, the Udalls.
That's
Mo Udall ran for president, he was a congressman, he's a Democrat. Stuart Udall was in the Secretary of the Interior in the Kennedy cabinet. And even the Romneys, George Romney famously was in the Secretary of HEW and came out against discriminatory housing. And it seemed like there was a different attitude about, and there was a lot of Mexican movement back and forth across the border, and I thought of sort of the, President Benson was the Secretary of Agriculture, and they had these large farms in Idaho, eastern Idaho, and I've always viewed the people of that valley where President Kimball, grew up, as having a different attitude. Have you thought of that thesis at all? You've talked about the Canadians. Have you ever considered the milieu of the Gila Valley, that those saints in that area?
I would say at a micro level, but what I think is, and I may be wrong on this, it's a really good question. But what you see, I would argue that the time that you're talking about with these leaders, we're talking about the 1930s and 40s mostly, and a little bit into the 50s. And what you see is a shift after World War II, the church writ large. This is Reuben Clark. This is Skousen and Benson. We're starting to really, really talk about that the Republican Party is God's party. It has its principles, demonizing the Democratic Party. You're starting to see that at a larger sphere politically. But what's interesting, we're in Utah. What's interesting, and Utahns are supporting the New Deal, the most liberal domestic policy program in the United States. And Utahns support Franklin Roosevelt. And some of the brethren in Salt Lake are not happy about that, including the church president, Heber Grant, who used to be a Democrat, but thought FDR was a scoundrel. And then by the 1960s, the second most liberal president is Lyndon Johnson. And Utahns support Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society. And Elder Benson's flying to the moon because he thinks this guy's a communist. And one of the reasons why Utahns support Lyndon Johnson is probably two reasons. I mean, I think some of them see the benefits of the Great Society. We're talking about Medicaid, Medicare, things of that nature. That's the president that creates Medicaid, Medicare, among other things, federal Pell Grants, all of that, the war on poverty. President McKay and Lyndon Johnson were fairly close. And Lyndon Johnson was very astute politically. And one can't imagine a Democrat, spending a lot of time in Utah today, a president's candidate. But Lyndon Johnson did. And he was always doing photo ops with his good friend, David McKay. And I just know too much about Lyndon Johnson to know that that's very calculated. But he does respect President McKay as a spiritual leader. I think that's legitimate and authentic. Anyway, so as Lyndon Johnson and President McKay, by the way, he's a conservative Republican, as they're doing these photo ops, Elder Benson's beside himself because he knows that Latter-day Saints are looking at the church president being chummy with this liberal president. And so you start to see this shift. And by the early 1970s, Utahns will support Republican presidents. Nixon's the first person that they support after a long slew of Democrat support. So the Latter-day Saints of Utah will support Richard Nixon, and it's been read ever since. And one of the things that Hugh B. Brown was absolutely mortified over was this idea that you could only be a good Latter-day Saint and be this particular member of this party.
And it
in
was
nine-
President Benson.
President Benson said that. He said it in a number of areas, but in 1974, to the Salt Lake Tribune is the one that we most recognize. And that's when he said that in order to be a good Latter-day Saint, you have to be a good Republican. Or to be a good Republican, you have to be better.
I grew up in Tooele, which, and in the 1970s, this time period you're talking about near to 1978. So Tooele has an RV depot, which means people from all over the country come in here, come bring their family. So we had 3 African-American kids in our high school. They were very popular, well liked, really cool kids. They, the one of the kids actually joined the church and was in the Stockton ward, which was in my state. So this was in, I think 1977, so it's close to where things are reaching the boiling point. They didn't know what to do with this kid because scouting and church were like this. And so they were genuinely asking, can we even award him as Eagle Scout and things like this? And it caused a huge brouhaha. It's awful. And that really bothered me all these years. Why was that even a question? You know? It was a mess.
I mean, the short answer is because the scouting troops, you had to hold the Aaronic priesthood in order to be in leadership.
But it seems like, but it's also like a public thing, it's not a church thing. Even people back then realized it, even me as a teenager realized, it's not church.
Yeah.
But it was.
But it
And
was.
so the lines are crossed in so many tangential ways besides when you're talking about, it was just a really big mess.
Well, the corollary of that would be too, if you're a Black woman in the church, why can't you hold callings, certain callings? That they're not even priesthood related.
Right.
But it's more than just the priesthood, right? It's just good old fashioned racism.
Right.
I mean,
It was pretty bad.
Just a quick question. I'm having trouble remembering exact details about the Church History Matters podcast. They had a series about this topic, and I think they used your book. That's the question. If you know if it was
Church History Matters. Who does that?
It's Scott Sorensen and Casey Griff.
Scott Woodward.
Scott Woodward.
Okay.
I think they used it.
Okay.
I'd have to go over.
I hope so. I know those guys. Yeah, that's good. I'm glad to hear that because they're.
If I may follow up with that too,
Yeah.
because because a lot of what you were saying, it was kind of reminiscent of what they were saying in their podcast series. Because like the exact same point they came to the conclusion was like, yeah, it was a mistake. And the other thing though,
They said that on their podcast. It was a mistake.
yeah, they said
That's interesting.
The other thing I wanted to know too was the one thing that really impressed me about Spencer Kimball with trying to work to get that consensus is with my brief knowledge of church history before that time period, like having consensus was like, didn't seem like it was a fit. Because like you had apostles doing this, apostles doing that, like off of so many different topics. But it seems to me that Spencer Kimball set that precedent, like, okay, for that institutional revelation, we need to be united on this. So that's just my personal observation. I don't know if you have any additional comments.
Yeah, I do. So the question is, why did President Kimball, if I could rephrase a little bit, why did President Kimball feel like he needed unanimity? And the short answer is it's such a momentous thing to lift the ban. And it had been in place since 1852. And President Kimball thought that, who am I to do this? This is not an aggressive red personality type of guy. He thought he would be a caretaker, really. So there's who am I to do this when my predecessors thought this ban was doctrinal. But I'm going to give maybe a better answer, and that is that President Kimball's a student of history. He had lived through the chaos of the David O. McKay years. I say chaos because there was dysfunction in the first presidency with President McKay's age. President McKay was a micromanager, and I say this respectfully, so don't misunderstand me, because we're all going to be there. And that is, we want to drive the car because we've been driving our whole life. And then your adult kid says, hey, Dad, it's time to give over the keys. Because if you don't, someone's going to get hurt. Maybe you, maybe somebody else. And President Brown and President Tanner, his counselors, said, President, it's time to hand over the keys. He's not well. And for the last 6 years of his presidency, he's not well. And so he doesn't want to give over the keys. Can't make decisions. So other people start making them for him, and he's upset. He calls in 2 additional counselors because he no longer trusts Hugh B. Brown and Eldon Tanner. And that's why we have 5 people in the first presidency at one point. It's not the official church message that, we've got this big church, we need more. He lost all faith in Tanner and Brown. So he calls in other people. Anyway, Kimball sees that dysfunction and he writes about it in his private papers, as do the other brothers. And he recognizes that if we're going to lift the ban, we have to avoid dysfunction. We have to be unified. The second thing is he also recognizes that, and I know you guys know this, 1890, Wilford Woodruff's manifesto, when Wilford Woodruff proclaimed a revelation without getting buy-in from the rest of the leaders. And you know what happens to the church, right? It splits the quorum right down the middle. The other half are supportive of polygamy and the other half are not. And President Kimball, as an astute student of history, recognizes that we can have a schism here unless I get buy-in. And for me, President Kimball's leadership, and I've shared this with the Kimball family many times, including my friend Chris Kimball, that his genius is getting these men in the Quorum of the 12 with deep-rooted racial prejudices to see that this is the best thing to do for the church. He had the prophetic authority to proclaim a revelation and say, follow it or not. This is what we're doing. But he didn't do that because he recognized it could be schismatic. And how he accomplished getting each of the 12 on board was one of the most interesting things I think I wrote about in Central Saints. So, yes.
Early 70s, I went to the head of the Institute of Religion at the University of Utah and said, I can't buy this, Blacksman having the priesthood. He goes, I can't either. He says, I think it's a policy and it's wrong. My question is, how many leaders in the church would have done what,
Said that,
said
responded that way.
Have you done any research on that?
On leaders who didn't believe in the ban.
Yeah, and would say that to a student that would go to it.
Sounds like Lowell
Oh.
Benyon. It does.
He's Gilbert Sharp.
Well, Lil Benyon would have been gone by then.
That's
He
true.
left. He got fired in '62. You're talking early '70s. So today there's a retrenchment going on in the church education system and also at BYU, which is all the more surprisingly brought me in.
Yeah, it is.
And I
Gilbert,
mean,
right?
yeah,
leading the
Clark
church.
Gilbert, the Commissioner of Education, is just, let's make this happy tonight. I'll just say there's a retrenchment in the wrong direction at BYU, and it's being felt throughout the church education system. It's highly unlikely that a student or a teacher would tell a student something that would be contrary to one of the doctrines of the church.
Now, let me just point out, you said policy, you said doctrine, you ought to just
Yeah.
excavate that whole thing because that's
He said
important.
he thought it was a policy that was wrong, and it wasn't a doctrine. He told.
See, Gilbert Sharps would have been a protege of Lowell Benyon. And you guys, does everybody know who Lowell Benyon is here? I don't want to presume that, knowledge. Some of you younger folks might not know, so I'll just indulge me for 30 seconds. Lowell Benyon he taught the Institute, taught for the church education system from 1934 until he was fired in 1962. And he got fired because of his outspoken views on the priesthood ban. And President McKay, who was second counselor in the first presidency in 1943. So that's President McKay, second counselor in 43. Lowell Benyon goes to President McKay and he says, I don't believe in this. I don't believe that Black people are cursed. Negroes, call them in those days. I don't believe that they're cursed. I don't believe in this less valiant thing. This is harming the church. Am I okay to continue to teach, President McKay? And to President McKay's credit, he says, yeah, I don't think I believe in all of this either. Imagine that, right? Imagine that. So he gave Lowell Benyon the grace to continue doing what he did. And Lowell Benyon, I love Benyon to pieces, but he made some tactical errors. He starts telling his students the ban's not only wrong, but it's immoral. And, it gets back to Joseph Fielding Smith, who leads the charge to get him fired. So I don't see that people to do that today. What happens, what you see today in the church is you see people in private settings like this talking about their issues. But I know I have a lot of friends who teach at BYU and throughout the church education system, and they're very, very careful what they say in public to their students. They have to be. They're careful. I had some BYU Idaho people brought me onto their podcast recently. And by Idaho it's a whole different animal than BYU Provo, as most of you know. And I thought, you sure you want me on? I really like you. I don't want you to get fired. And anyway, I always behave, but they wouldn't have that liberty to do that today because LGBTQ, if these folks even wear a pride pin, they're going to be in trouble. That's the environment that we find ourselves.
I know you've been waiting, but after you, I wanna
Oh,
ask some.
are you?
Thanks.
Josh?
Yeah, didn't you have your hand up?
Yeah, I have.
Thank you.
Can I get in line behind that dude?
Oh,
Thank you. Yes.
So I think one of the reasons your work is so compelling is because you seem to leave personal bias or an opinion out of it. Reason why you're invited on Mormon Stories and to BYU and here, you know.
Yeah.
So I think I have kind of three questions with that as a pretext. Is there anything that you did include in your book that you thought would be too controversial or so controversial that it would preclude you from like having BYU as an audience? Any one piece of information or documentation? Second would be, is there any piece of document or information that you learned that moved the needle on your personal opinion
About
the
band,
any of it, yeah,
or-
about any of what you thought you knew previously? So just those two, I guess.
So the first one is the controversial one. Is there anything that I thought that would be controversial that would put off rank and file members? Is that fair?
Yeah.
And yes. Yes. So Ed Kimball, after 9 hours of being in his house, he reached down under his chair and he had a folder for me. And he was waiting to give it to me. And he said, I want you to have this. Treat this with care. And I'm thinking to myself, I can't get to my car fast enough. And so I got in my car and I'm reading this. I'm thinking, oh, wow. This is President Kimball rebuking Elder McConkie for making up stories about the revelation. We saw Jesus. We heard a voice. And obviously Ed Kimball couldn't write about this in a book published by Desert Book. And so that chapter, I write about this. And Elder Packer, same thing. He's good friends with Elder McConkie. We saw Jesus. They didn't see Jesus. They didn't hear voices, but they're saying this. And one of the things that I wanted to do, you said something about I write without bias or I do something without bias. I have plenty of bias. And I'm really, really careful when I want to insert my voice. And in 1 second, I want to tell you guys something, a current problem working with Hugh Brown. I'd love to get your feedback on this. It's a big issue. And so I knew this would be sticky for some saints, that two apostles are making up stuff about the revelation. President Kimball gets word of it, and he's angry. Quit saying we saw Jesus. Quit saying we heard a voice. Some of you are old enough to remember President Hinckley as the first counselor in the first presidency in 1988. He gave this very sort of passive-aggressive talk in the priesthood session in which he said, no voice was heard. That's a pop to Elder McConkie, who's now been dead for 3 years. And if you didn't know the context, that's the context of that. And so here you have this great spiritual moment. I don't want you guys to walk out of the room tonight thinking that just because President Kimball's going to lift the ban the day of and he had to work hard and all of this stuff, that there wasn't anything spiritual on June 1st. There was. Definitely was. And so the controversy is two senior apostles making stuff up. And what I didn't do in my book, and I purposely chose not to do it, is to ask why. Why would they do this? I mean, that's a really big question, right? Why would they use? And the best answer that I have is that they were worried that the saints in the South wouldn't support the lifting of the ban, so they have to embellish it. And President Kimball, his response, this is one of the reasons why I love President Kimball. We don't need to embellish anything. this is what happened. This is our spiritual experience that we had, this great unity and coming together. And even old Ezra Benson, who was dead set against lifting the ban, even though he changes his mind on June 1st. Going into June 1st, he did not support this. In fact, when President Kimball wanted to lift the ban that day, Elder Benson says, let's table it. I don't want to talk about it. Because he'd been trying to get them to change the ban for months at that point. Benson didn't want to do it. Anyway, so those two apostles making stuff up, and Elder McConkie gets wrapped pretty hard over this. I have Elder McConkie's private papers, or a lot of his private papers, so I know what's going on with his side of things. Elder Packer, I have secondhand accounts through other sources from general authorities. I don't have access to Elder Packer's diaries. I wish I did. But that's a really controversial thing that I knew I needed to say to share that story. And I knew that some Latter-day Saints that'd be tough for them to hear, because you're lying about a spiritual experience that you needn't lie about. Your second question is, was there an aha moment for me as a scholar?
As a person.
As a person.
Like the rest of us.
I'm speaking as a man now. I love that. Also on my name, speaking as a man on Tuesday. It's your job to figure out which is which. I love our faith tradition. We put the onus on us. Let's don't do this. Protestants don't do this. Here's the doctrine, follow it or not. But anyway, but you're always guessing. Moving target. So my aha moment as a person is when I read their diaries and letters, how it affected them personally. We like to think of Joseph Fielding Smith, the doctrinal expert, right? The guy that's really racist to the core of the things he's written, left a paper trail to fill up his room. And he's an easy guy to caricature because of all the things he said about race. Some really awful stuff. But I read his diaries and I saw a different dimension to him, as you usually do when you get into people's private stuff. You see a different thing. And Joseph Fielding Smith he's funny, he's a prankster, he's a jokester. You'll never get that from his sermons. He just comes across as this crusty Old Testament preacher. And so anyway, I fell in love with him through his private papers. And in his diary, he talks about a story that this is what I want to share with you, is that he was at a priesthood meeting in Utah, I think Salt Lake, and a guy named T. Edgar Lyon, who taught alongside Lowell Bennett at the Institute, University of Utah Institute, just a few miles from here. T. Edgar Lyon was a mission president in the 1930s in, 1940s actually, in Denmark. And one of the families that he knew there, they had migrated to the United States. And this is a family of faithful Latter-day Saint men. One of them was a state president, one was a bishop, one was in a high council. And the youngest son, who was, I think, just off his mission, he was going to get married in the temple. And he told President Lyon, this young man about to get married, he said, my sister just did some genealogy and we have an African ancestor in our line. Now, the church follows the one drop rule. That means if you have 100 white people, and let's say there's one person who derives from sub-Saharan Africa, you're deemed cursed. I mean, it just defies credulity, but that's how the church operates, one drop. And which is the most draconian view of all of this, not 1/32, not 1/16, but one drop. Anywhere back, one drop, right? Anyway, so he confesses it to President Lyon. I'm getting married next week, but I just found out that I've got one drop in my ancestry. I'm cursed. He said, what do I do? I'm blonde hair, blue eyes. My church has now deemed me a Negro, but I'm not a Negro. He's got blonde hair, blue eyes. I've seen pictures of this kid. I tried to put him in my book, but I couldn't get permission. And anyway, so blonde hair, blue eyes. I'm now cursed. What do I do? And Lyon goes up to Joseph Fielding Smith before the priesthood meeting. And he says, President Smith, I've got this man in my mission, and here's the family, the brothers of bishops, stake president, high council, and all this stuff. And this young man's getting married at the temple next week. And what do I tell him? Joseph Fielding says, what do you mean, what do you tell him? You know the church doctrine. And I thought, what? And then, but here's the redemption story, is an hour and a half after the meeting was over, President Smith calls up T. Edgar Lyon, motions him to come up to the stand. And he says, I've reconsidered. Tell that young man not to tell anybody. Because if he discloses his cursed ancestry, it will trigger a release from the stake president, the high councilman, and the bishop. It'll ruin this family. And so even somebody as hardcore and crusty as old Joseph Fielding had this humanitarian moment in which he told this young man to just, you have my blessing, go your way.
It's beautiful, but the logic is it doesn't matter if we ruin the other sentence.
Right.
Right.
Patriarchy, right?
That drives me back.
Yeah, I hear you, and I'm not
They're
gonna,
human.
I'm not gonna defend this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've read Smith's diaries in letters, and there's no question Kimball is more humane about all of this than Smith is. But there is a little bit,
But he does, he has a heart.
he does have a heart.
The one drop rule. He has one drop.
Okay, I think this gentleman here and then go back there.
Just real quick,
Yeah.
did you want?
No, you go.
Oh, you
So-
had your hand, let's go.
So I'm reading, did you have any intent when you wrote this and all the great insights you provided about how the brethren tug of war to come to Revelation, that could be applicable to what's going on today with their struggle with LGBTQ? Because I have a daughter who's gay, and I'm sure the brethren, we know some of the brethren have family members who are gay. I'm sure there is a mighty tug of war going on. I'm not aware of any of it, but likely just because they're real people. Did you have any sense of, as you wrote this might be helpful to others with that in mind? Or is this purely, no, it's about this and?
Yeah,
apply how
no, it
you
wasn't. So the question is, did I anticipate that Latter-day Saints would draw parallels with LGBTQ plus and the priesthood ban? Is that fair?
Yes, and might we look back in 50 years at how archaic our current views appears to be in 50 years as we now,
Yeah.
I just think the black thing is the stupidest thing, but you've given me more empathy to, these people are not, I give them the benefit of the doubt, they're acting out of a positive intent.
Yeah.
But man, I just can't relate. So what's gonna look like in 70 years? So did you have that in your mind as you wrote this? You
Oh,
figured,
yeah.
no, I'm right and let it be what it'll be?
No, I knew. I knew there were parallels, and I agree with you 100%. We're gonna look back in 50 years and think, oh my goodness, really? I treated that this way?
Okay.
But the question is how do we change it? That's the issue.
Right.
And so the issue would be, I'm gonna give you the most unfiltered response. And there's one of my colleagues, I'm not gonna say his name because and then I just want to keep privacy tonight. But he's on a high council and he has to be careful what he says in public settings. We've been on panels together for a long time. And he was asked about the same question. And he gave this very, distant and abstract answer to LGBTQ. Then there's me. And my answer is the brethren have to talk about it first. But what gets them talking about it would be Latter-day Saints saying, this is a problem. This church tent is way too small. We're losing so many good people. And by the way, I'm going to say this with all due respect. My daughter's gay too. Why would gay people want to be in this church where the assumption is they're flawed and they need to be fixed?
Exactly.
And
Because they're cursed.
my 83-year-old father just gave me a little bit of a talk about this. And I give my dad space to say these kinds of things. Never want to make religion divisive. And he said, but God will fix her in the resurrection. And I said to my middle class or my working class father, who's a bread man, he's not a deep thinker, but I love him to death. I said, Dad, that's about the shittiest theology I've ever heard. And it contradicts everything about the gospel today, right? We're supposed to find joy and all of that. And yet somehow your granddaughter is supposed to be single, separate, and sexless. And then God's going to fix her in the resurrection. You really think that's a good space for your granddaughter to be in? So pressure on the brethren. They talk about it. They pray about it. They see there's a problem. I'm going to say something that it shouldn't be controversial, hope not. But there are more general authorities than any of us in this room can imagine that are in support of marriage equality. The problem is there are enough people holding out. That's the problem. And just to put a very crass point on it, some people have to die before things change.
It's probably there's an age correlation.
There is an age correlation. Yeah, and if you guys just saw something recently with Elder Snow, did you see that?
Yes.
What is it?
So Elder Snow,
I know him.
he's a wonderful man. He's so that you don't know Elder Snow, he's a retired general authority emeritus. he was a church historian, so guys like me get to meet him and comes to our talks and all that stuff. And Elder Snow has two gay granddaughters, and those of us who know him, I mean, we've known about this for a long time, his views on gay marriage. He's been supportive for years. The problem is, don't tell me in a private room like this. Tell other people. And so a few days ago, he gave an interview with the Salt Lake Tribune, and it got published that he's supportive. And people in the gay community are like, so what, big deal. It is a big deal. It may not affect you and your activity in the church, but it may affect your father and mother and uncle and aunt. In fact, a retired general authority is now on record saying, I support gay marriage.
Right.
It's a big deal.
Thank you.
I need to tell you, I know I'm being insistent, because last night I had to give a talk to End Pride Month.
Oh.
With several drag queens at the Edison House. And these brothers know that I'm a faithful member. And
We all serve in the African refugee branch. That's why.
and I was Grand Marshal of the Pride
This whole couch.
Festival. So that's why they asked me to end it. And so I was able to talk, of course, about my journey, which has been long. But the moderator of the panel I talked on at the Edison House with all these drag queens was President Benson's grandson. And I blasted the Republicans just because I've been a Democrat. And I blasted Benson before I knew, and all of these, and told them that isn't the way the majority of us feel, that we welcome them and we want them and blah, 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 blah. So I go back to the 50s where my uncle was an NBA player. And when they played in different places in Utah, they couldn't use the same motels. They could go to the Hotel Utah. That upset him so much. So I just want you to know, Matt, that there have been little people like my father and my uncles talking about this forever. And when I first met Dr. King in the 60s, and these guys know that, and I marched with him, I came back to Utah. Well, guess what? He was a communist and a womanizer. And here I was moved to death. I've never recovered from how inspiring that was. And I, of course, knew he was a womanizer. So I could not get my black son.
But he wasn't a polygamist.
I have 10 black kids. None of them wanted to come and hear you. They said it's just poison. They're so damaged by what has happened to them. And you can say, well, that's their fault. That's their fault. They need to do this and that. I tell you, when it hurts so deeply, when you're segregated and secondhand, they feel it so deeply. So I'm not gonna go into all that.
Thank you. Sorry.
You're
Yes, let's go here and then we need to go back to the room over here.
So here's my question. What was your thesis? How can I, as a white member of the church, make it better? What can I do to welcome my black brothers and sisters better? Because clearly we're still not doing a great job of it.
Biggest problem in the church, I think.
What can I do? You come up with a conclusion there that I can change the way I go to church tomorrow and whatever. I'm going to church tomorrow.
Let's hope not.
To do things differently in Utah. We in Colorado, we're more righteous. Once a week.
Yeah, you need to go.
So, yeah, I think that's a great question. So that's the gist of some of what the BYU people asked is, the religion people, what can we do better in our classrooms? And one of the answers would be obviously to educate yourself on these issues, to not whitewash racism. Let's just pause for a minute. Well, let me answer your question. I want to build on that just for a quick second. So educate yourself, take any opportunity you can in Sunday school class or sacrament meetings or private gatherings, and talk about things about racism. And I don't mean just theological racism. You guys know that most young people at church today don't know anything about the curse of Cain. We've got data on this, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But racism is as strong as it's ever been because it's MAGA racism. It's, all lives matter. Well, when you say stuff like that, what you're really saying is the suffering of Black men who were being terrorized and brutalized that led to that movement. What you're really saying is, I am completely unsympathetic with that. I have no connection to their suffering, right? So it's that kind of racism. Also, talking about it constantly in your church, allowing your bishop to asking permission to give maybe a talk on the race and the priesthood document, or
Or your book?
Or my book, or in fairness, but also, race in the priesthood, there's a desert book that did a little piece on, a little tiny book on race, where it attributes the band to racism. That's huge, because it's desert book, right? So take those little moments to share others around you or with you and talk and engage. The thing about the Book of Mormon, one of the biggest things about BYU racism today is, some of you probably don't know this, but in 2018, there was a study at BYU. And it was a study of BIPOC students, so Black and brown and multiracial students. I think it was like 60% of them, I write about this in my book, but 60% of them felt uncomfortable at BYU because of racism. I mean, imagine this, right? This is supposed to be a universalist gospel that brings in everybody, all are like into God, but 60% of Black and brown people at BYU don't feel comfortable. What in the world's going on? So when this story broke, I was at BYU, it was in the summer months, I was there doing research, and I saw the dean in the archives. And different dean than the one that brought me in last month. So I talked to the dean, I said, all right, what's going on? What the heck is going on? I said, it'd be really too easy to blame the racism on the senior faculty, right? These old guys that somehow don't know any better. That's just low-hanging fruit. And I said, what's the problem? I can't imagine that any of your colleagues are teaching that Black people bear this divine curse today in the 21st century, right? He says the Book of Mormon. He said, we've got people, faculty, teaching these racialized verses in the Book of Mormon, skins of blackness and white and delightsome and all of that stuff. And they're talking about skin color as a sign of divine approval or divine disfavor. And you've got Black and brown people in your students in your class. Gee, they're offended. Who would have thunk it, right? So the report had identified the religion department as a big part of the problem, not the only part, but a big problem. So I asked the dean, once he told me the Book of Mormon stuff, I said, what's going on? He said, we just haven't received any word from Salt Lake on how to deal with this. And so what we've seen with these very difficult racialized verses is, we've seen apologetic Mormon scholars do a kabuki dance to try to explain what it means. It really means your soul. It means this is the stuff they taught for 100 years. And something called reception history, how people understood these verses, leaders and members. They understood the skin tropes as representing righteousness or unrighteousness. And the presumption was, if God cursed you because you made a mistake, the presumption is that you have to lose that curse in order to inherit the celestial kingdom. That is, all people will be white in the celestial kingdom, which is the universal color of the human race. That's what the church's assumption was built on. We were all white, some of us got cursed, and we'll lose that curse when we get baptized and remain faithful. So there's a very literal skin color change going on, and that's the kind of crap that they have to wade through. And the stuff that I always tell people with the Book of Mormon, it's, somebody asked me, should we just go through and cut all this stuff out? I'm like, yeah, sure. It turns out to be Jefferson's Bible if you do that. The guy cut out half the Bible. Yeah, good luck explaining that away to people. I said, no, don't cut out any of this stuff. I mean, don't make any more changes to it. Just contextualize it. Own it. Be transparent. Yes, the brethren taught it to be a literal change for a while. I'm not a fan of this, but it's important to contextualize. Protestant Christians were doing the same darn thing. And the Latter-day Saint tradition is caught up in this stuff, these racialized tropes. Contextualize it, own it. Yes, they taught it. Yes, you could read it in church magazines, but the church does not teach that today. You can always end it on a happy note, in my opinion, with the Race and the Priesthood essay that the church published in 2013, because it repudiates those erstwhile racial teachings. But the problem is that when you try to pretend that it's not what it is, that's when kids see right through that, and adults. So my big kick on the church is, whenever I speak to people, I'm looking in the room, how many general authorities are in the room? All right, I'm talking to you, and you today. It's always about transparency and honesty, and how that serves the church's interest better than obfuscating and minimizing.
And your book makes me pretty frustrated with Bruce R. McConkie, because I loved him growing up. But to his credit, he said, forget everything that I said, and he spoke very he contradicted his things he had said for years. So to his credit, That's a man of faith. He stood up and said in writing, forget everything I said. This is the new doctrine. This is how.
Well, I ain't tight on that though. One of the things,
Well, so his
I love your
attitude-
enthusiasm.
I love his attitude, but I am disturbed that he fabricated or created new doctrine. So to me, that makes the doctrinal foundation for about anything puts the shakes. It makes me think, dude, they're just making this up, and what doctrine can they fabricate about LGBTQ? So that's where my brain goes. But
I mean,
nobody-
people, I think rightfully so, draw those conclusions, but with Ellen McConkie, we have to be careful because that's the church line when he gave that address to the church seminary people in August of 78, just 2 months after the revelation. And he said, forget everything I've said. It's been church manuals, right? People love to
Right.
quote that.
It's on the
because
church website,
it
right?
makes us feel better. But really, that's not what he doesn't, he's not repudiating any of the doctrinal rationales for the ban. What he's repudiating is the timing of it. He's told several people in my lifetime and your lifetime, we'll never see the lifting of this ban. That's what he's apologizing for. And how do I know this? Because I have his private papers, for one. And for two, he continues to talk about Black people being cursed from the seed of Cain as late as a 1981 General Conference sermon. And to the day he dies, he, in April of 85, as he's on his last days with cancer, his book is called New Witness for the Articles of Faith. It's a pretty big doorstopper. And he talks about all the garbage he'd been talking about Mormon doctrine. He's talking about a hierarchy of races and God privileges certain people over others. He hasn't jettisoned any of this stuff. It's just the timing of it that he's referring to. All right. Hey, we gotta go. This lady. Oh.
Okay, we've got a question from Christians in the Zoom. So Chris, let's see if we can hear you.
Chris?
Hi. Hey, I have a question and a fun fact from the question. So I actually live in Harold B. Lee's house. We moved here about a dozen years ago from Seattle, and our realtor, who's very gay and very not Mormon, was so excited to tell us this. And we're like, okay, that's awesome. But I tried to find what I can. How pivotal was he, or how much impact did he have? I hear his name, but I don't hear or have read, a lot of more than that.
You're gonna need to move.
Yeah. Get out.
Pretty picture. We're gonna exercise your house. So is the
Just wait.
Chris, is the question, are you asking about what did President Lee say about the ban and race teachings? What did he think about all this?
Yes, I have heard some of that, and one thing that's really interesting is so that his, I think, daughters wouldn't marry someone Black at BYU or something like that was a concern. But how much impact did he have? I can't get a sense of, I hear other names, and you've said other names more, so I just know he was, he was one of the other side holding back, but.
So Harold Lee is, he's an interesting character. So he's called into the Quorum of the 12 in 1943. He's a younger man. And I think it bears repeating that when you get called into the 12, you know people. Doesn't mean you're not qualified. I want to be clear on that, but you know people, right? And it's just like, oh, I got this guy to stake president. He's really wonderful. He's also a friend of mine. We should consider him for an opening the 12. That's how it works. And so Harold Lee was a stake president in Salt Lake during the Great Depression, and really turned some heads with some of the things he was doing to help out his flock. Won the Brethren's favor, gets called in as a younger man in 1943. And Harold Lee is a very red dominant personality. And so all throughout the late 40s and into the 50s, he's the most dominant voice in the Quorum of the 12, that people recognize his authority. Marion G. Romney, one of his colleagues and contemporaries, commented that he was like the prophet Joseph Smith. And I'm thinking, a little starstruck there, Marion. Anyway, but so he's this dominant personality, and he's the guy that's responsible for correlation today. So he does a number of things that really is still with us today. And he told his granddaughter, or he told his daughter, he said that that Negroes will never hold the priesthood as long as I'm in the church. And he also scolded Ernest Wilkinson in 1960, the president of BYU. He scolded Wilkinson when he said, "Why do we have Africans at BYU? If one of those Africans marries my granddaughter," who was at BYU at the time, "if one of them marries my granddaughter, I'm going to hold you personally responsible, Ernest." And Wilkinson, being the guy that he was, he shot back. He said, "You should hold yourself responsible because you're the one that approved, you, the board, approved them coming here." Oops. And there was about 7 Africans in the early 60s that got special permission to come to BYU. And he was part of the board of trustees that signed off on that. Apparently he forgot that. But anyway, the upshot and the conclusion here is that he's the one that put a stop to ordaining Monroe Fleming to the Melchizedek priesthood in 1969. And he but put a positive spin on this, not that I need to, but in 1973, a lot of Black Latter-day Saints, what few there are, they're upset with not holding the priesthood and not being able to go to the temple. And so they complained to the first presidency, and out of those complaints comes the Genesis group. And today at lunch, I had lunch with a BYU friend of mine, close friend, and she was saying that Joseph Fielding Smith is the one that did that. And I said, he's sleeping through his meetings. He's not doing anything. The person that's running the church in 1973 is Harold Lee, his first counselor. So it's Lee that gave the green light to organize the Genesis group, not the person in charge of the church, at least allegedly. So anyway, Lee is not, some of his descendants talk about that if my grandfather would have lived, he would have lifted the ban just like President Kimball. And my response is, oh, interesting. He had plenty of chances and just chose not to do it. So I hope that helps.
It does. So to just add to that.
We need to move on. Sorry, Chris. Is that okay? We've got
No,
some
I just have
questions
to
and
say
running
this
late.
super quick, please. So my son is married to a Black woman, and they met at BYU, and she's there, she's more faithful than I am and wonderful. And they live in Amsterdam, and they have for several years, and he is the bishop in Amsterdam with his Black wife and children. So we just say that it's poetic justice, that we live here and he knows better, and that nice things are happening now.
That's beautiful.
That is. That's great. Thank you for your question.
So we
Thank
can
you.
one more question and then I kind of got to wrap up because our hosts are probably.
That's bad.
What kind of feedback you've gotten about your book from people of color, those who lived through the ban and those who are experiencing its ripples?
Yeah, so you can imagine there's a range of responses to the book. And let me share something before I answer your question directly. I'm glad you asked it. So 2 of the apostles have read the book. I'm friends with one of the apostles' brothers, so I know for a fact that he's read the book. And the other apostle that I don't need to be coy about this. Todd Christofferson's read it and Jeff Holland's read it. And so Elder Christofferson read it, and then I'm friends with his brother. And the other one, Elder Holland, one of my good friends is good friends with Elder Holland. And so he called me 3 months ago and he said, Matt, he's driving home. You'll never guess where I was today. You're right. I'll never guess. Where were you? I was at Elder Holland's house. I said, all right. And he said, when I walked in, he was reading your book. And Elder Holland, I knew, my wife and I knew Jeff and Pat and their son-in-law and daughter a long time ago. They were in our New York ward and they would come visit. And so we got to know him a little bit there. And so he read my book, and one of the general authority 70s read my book, and when it first came out, and he wrote me emails after every chapter giving these lengthy, it was kind of endearing. It was about, I didn't know this, I didn't know that, and it was cute and flattering. But he wrote me several, and he invited me to speak to his Latter-day Saint group in this fall.
Hmm.
And I won't be nearly as unvetted than I am unfiltered. How Black people respond to the book. It's a couple positive. So some have said it's very faith promoting, which is, I didn't write it to be faith promoting, but that makes me happy. And they talk about why it's faith promoting, because they see the humanity in leaders that most people don't see. When you read certain literature from the church, and the worst thing about the apostle so and so is that he stubbed his toe and said phooey. Oh, he's human, see? Really? That's the best you got, huh? Well, you know darn well, I mean, there's some real humanity going on with the brother, and there's the good, the bad, the ugly, honestly. And I mean that in a very most sincere way. So, faith promoting. The other one would be, there's been a couple of new converts who've reached out to me and struggled with faith crises. And I'm going to tell you what I tell everybody. I don't like pastoral care. That's just not what I do as a scholar. I want to focus on my book and things, but it comes with the territory. What I always tell people of color who have this faith crisis when they read this stuff, and the reason why they have the faith crisis is because the church has done a terrible job telling the story, right? With the Book of Mormon racialized stuff and all that nonsense they try to peddle. So they have this faith crisis. And the first thing I always tell Black and biracial Latter-day Saints who have these faith crises with race is they'll say, Brigham Young's a racist. And I'll say, so what? I know it's easy for me as a white dude to say that. So what? He's dead. He died in 1877. And then I say, how does your word treat you today? They love us. What's the problem? So, but the obverse is true. Oh, they don't like my biracial family. My kids are always, then leave. Go somewhere else. Go to the Genesis group in Salt Lake. Go where you're wanted. Life is too short to put up with this crap. And so I take a very pragmatic approach to these kinds of things. And I don't think that racism from a church president who lived when 4 million Africans were enslaved ought to bear on your church activity today. It's all about community here and now. And if your ward is gracious and loves you and you love them, I don't see that what Young said should be a barrier to your activity. And that's kind of how I roll with these things. But I'll just wrap this up. Black people have overwhelmingly reached out, and it's been positive.
Excellent. I want to just pose one question or two before we end about, again, Revelation, which I've grappled with for some time now. So you give the example of Darius Gray, who I've met before, and Keith Hamilton, both Black men. Darius Gray has this profound spiritual experience in the middle of the night. God tells him the band was wrong. It was a mistake. It wasn't supposed to happen. And then Keith Hamilton has a very different approach. He feels like the band was of God, right? Your book is full of examples, and I'm sure that Ezra Taft-Benson probably is too, of good leaders coming up with very different opposite conclusions about what they believe God's telling them. So I assume you have children. Yeah, you said you have children, you have leaders. Well, if you were to write a little tiny short pamphlet of how do you figure out what is revelation, not just institutional, but in your own life, what would you say? Because you have good people on both sides. Sure, just certain that God's speaking to them. And one of them is right, one of them is wrong. How do you parse that? I mean, to me, that's a huge question. That's at the root of everything. And you talk about LGBTQ. Going forward, how we answer that will affect that, and questions that we don't even know about in the future. And if we fall on the right side of history or the wrong side of history and do a lot of harm or end up helping. So I would just love your thoughts on that. I know that's a little in the past pastoral area, but I'm sure you've thought about it.
Yeah, no, I have. So this is what I would say if I were on a podcast. That's a faith question. And I'm happy to entertain that question. But I do say when I'm on podcasts, I always tell people a couple things I always tell them. Don't ask faith questions. Don't criticize the brother, and don't criticize the church. Focus on the book. Do that for a lot of reasons, because I want people to focus on the scholarship. This is my way of trying to make a difference in the world. And I can't make a difference if they're distracted.
True.
And if you want to criticize the brethren or criticize the church after we're done, I don't care. That's fine. But You know, that's why I'm able to go on Mormon Stories on Tuesday and BYU on Wednesday,
Right,
because I have the same rules for both.
yes.
So the revelation question is born out of our own values. And I would say to that, that this is the church, some of the brothers would not like this answer, but because this is a church that thrives on authority. But first and foremost, our authority is ourselves and our God. It's not brother so-and-so or elder so-and-so or president so-and-so telling us what to think or act. And we have to have our own moral compass, and we have to follow that compass first and foremost, even if it conflicts with some of the authority direction we've received. And that's where LGBTQ comes in our hearts and our minds. I mean, my daughter shared with you guys that she's gay. And I thought a lot about how to use language to connect with my daughter and to tell people what I told my father. Why would you want your granddaughter in this church? She wouldn't be happy, but the church harms her. It's not just that she wouldn't be happy, it harms her because it tells her implicitly that she's second class. And so with that moment, with the idea of revelation, I assume you mean institutional.
Well, and personal too.
And personal too. So the personal would be, of course, is following your dictates and your conscience through prayer and meditation, and trying to understand that this is your position, and maybe you proselytize others, maybe you don't. But institutionally, you have to continue to speak out, I think. And the church is at a pivotal moment right now where they're making clear decisions that they do not want gay people in this church. And it pains me to say this, but when they're telling gay Latter-day Saint students at BYU and in the church education system, they're telling faculty, you cannot give them a crying shoulder, you cannot be sympathetic, you cannot wear the pride pin, you certainly can't clasp arms with them and go march in a parade. You cannot do that. I don't know of a bigger way, more powerful way to say, we don't want you.
Right.
And that is a church that I just struggle with endlessly because it violates every core principle of who I am. I'm the most, just like a number of you, I believe in inclusivity, I believe in love and tolerance. And I don't see that from the church. I see that from church leaders. Some church leaders are very tolerant and inclusive. Why don't they speak out for? Some of them do in private that you and I will never hear about. And some of them just don't have the courage to do it because they have personal ambitions and because they don't want to rock the boat. That's when we talk about the leadership being the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's what you get. They're just human like the rest of us. They have flaws. But some of them are doing some really good work behind closed doors that most of us don't know.
It's good to know. Good to know.
Yeah, it's not always what you see. Don't ever think that the top 15 are on the same page because they're not.
Right.
They may say they are, they may be unanimous vote and all of this, but that's just not how the church works.
Which leads me to, Chad came up with this years ago. I actually have a URL that I haven't used, but crowdsourcing God. I mean, to me, that's basically how it works, especially institutionally. I mean, correlations and, meaning. I mean, and I think that's okay with that. I mean, I think that's how it's just very messy. It seems to
Let me
be.
give one example that maybe you guys don't know about. This is a frustration. I know we got to wrap this up, but I was interviewing with Mike Otterson, the head of the church PR guy in 2013. It was about some research I was doing, and there was a news story that had broken in the newspapers. And it was Utah newspapers. And it was about that there would be a brown Adam and Eve in South America.
In the temple.
In the temple, sorry. In the temple. Yeah. Rather than having white folks
Right.
from Utah, we're going to have our own people from South America. I mean, imagine this, right? Brown people going and watching brown people represent this
It's a shocker.
this beautiful ritual. Well, he looks at me, and I'll tell you about Latter-day Saints, especially for people who work in the church. They'll always talk in private. They'll just talk. It's like therapeutic. I think I've got a bullseye on my back. It says sucker. And he said, Matt, you want to know why that's so? Sure. And he said, because all these people complained. He said, why do we have these white people from Logan, Utah coming and playing our Adam and Eve? Why don't we have our own people? And we listened. The other story I'll share is when there were 3 openings in the Quorum of the 12 in 2015, There was a Black Latter-day Saint man who was president of the Genesis Group. He just passed away a year or two ago, named Don Harwell. Don Harwell saw Jeff Holland at a Lowe's, I think it was Lowe's in Bountiful. Saturday, had his blue jeans on with his hoe, buying a hoe for his garden. Old Don Harwell goes over to him, and I'm sure Elder Holland just wants to
This
be
is
left
years
over.
ago, right?
This is 2015.
Oh, 2015, that's right.
Spring of 2015. I'm sure Elder Holland just wants to buy his
Yep.
hoe and go home and use it. But here's Brother Harwell goes right over to Elder Holland and he says, "Why don't we have a black apostle?" I mean, no filter. It wasn't, "Hi, Elder Holland, how are you?" "Why don't we have a black apostle?" And Elder Holland, I mean, I give him credit. He didn't give the BS response, which is, "Well, we're just waiting for God." You know, none of that stuff. He just said, "Well, you know, we don't have a critical mass of black people in the church. And maybe one day we'll have a black apostle when we get a critical mass of people in the church." And so Harwell goes away, you know, thinking about that story. On the one hand, it wasn't a good answer because his response is, of course, we want black people to come into the church. We need to have a black representation in the leadership.
Yeah.
That's just common sense. But at least he had the courage to tell him how it works. That's how it works. And it's the church isn't there yet, and they'll probably get there, but they are susceptible to pressure. And if you're asking about LGBTQ stuff, when the right people with the right numbers talk to the right at the right time, they'll listen. They'll listen.
We could only get a critical mass of women in the church, right?
Oh, wait.
Yeah. Yeah, that was good.
We only had a suggestion box, so we could actually hear what we think.
It's about that big.
It's full.
It's full. That's awesome.
Well.
I'm sorry. Sorry, my right is it, yeah. Thank you
Thank
so much.
I tried to talk to
Sorry,
her.
I have to.
Big, beautiful black son coming in, and so that's too painful. He's picking her up.
Tell your son we missed him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. I could spend a few more hours, but was better not. This has been lovely. Thank you for wonderful questions and your thoughts. Chad, that was kind of a good way to leave it. We have. Yeah, right? I mean, you guys have been speaking up for a long time now, and back in the day when the priesthood ban was lifted, people came up to the general authorities and go, "Well, what about women?" Right? We're going, "What about women? Why aren't they getting the priest?" So we've got a lot of work to do. I think a lot of work to do. Let's see. Jameis, can we have a little closing sing along to leave?
Sure, let's get Lorraine and.
Yeah, Lorraine, anybody else? Kristen?
Whoever
we want to join.
I know we have to go.
Yeah.
Is Kristen over there?
No?
Jane's right there.
James there.
Let's just sing a song that, let's sing a.
Whatever Jameis feels inspired to do.
Yeah, let's just sing,
Thank you, Matt, by the way. That was amazing.
Yeah.
Instead of the necklace string, give again, give again, give sad the little string as it hurries down the hill. I smile, I know, but where I go, the grass grows greener still. Singing, singing all the way, give away, oh, give away. Singing, singing all the way. Give away. Give sad the little rain. Give, oh, give, give, oh, give. Give sad the little rain as it fell upon the flowers. Always the drooping heads it said as it fell upon the flowers. Singing, singing all the day. Give away, oh, give away. Singing, singing all the day. Give away. Give them for Jesus' sake. Give, give, give. Give them for Jesus' sake. There is something of and give. Singing, singing all the day. Give away, oh, give away. Singing, singing all the day. Give away.
Oh, it's
Oh, that's beautiful.
Thank you. Anybody want to volunteer for prayer since I didn't ask anybody? Pardon? That'd be lovely. Like I said at the beginning, were you here at the beginning? You can say Mother in Heaven if you want to.
Yeah, the first time I came, I cried, I got to pray to Heavenly Parents.
That's
It
right.
was my life, so I will not forget it.
Okay.
Core memory. Our loving Heavenly Parents, we're so grateful to be here to talk about how we can love our brothers and sisters better. Please help us to leave here better at loving all of thy children. We're just so grateful to be here and to have this opportunity to be better at loving people. And we ask you please help us to make our churches a safe haven for our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, our Black and brown and all the races, brothers and sisters. And we're just so grateful for this opportunity to recognize where we've gone wrong and try to be better. And we're grateful that we can do that as together as a community. And we say these things in our Savior's name, Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Hey, before, just one thing I forgot. This is a new book out from Signature Book about Eugene England, which you mentioned quite a bit, Eugene England and second class saints. Yeesh. And so a number of the questions that came up tonight are answered really well in that book. So if you haven't listened to the book or bought the book or read the book, please get the book because it's just full of really good stuff. Like the question about Harold B. Lee, you would have gotten a lot of insight. There's just so much that we couldn't cover in that. So do that. So this is a book by a friend, and actually Robert A. Reese is mentioned, a dear friend, Robert. He's a good friend of ours. And he's one of the editors of this book. So there is a story in here, and I'm not trying to put a plug for me, but I wrote an essay in here that has to do with Sam's grandfather, James McConkie, who was a nephew that was partially raised in Bruce R. McConkie's home and Joseph B. Worland's home, because his father passed away when he was 7. So we saw those two very different apostles, one Republican, one Democrat, and each of them would tell the other, don't believe what the other says. But years later, I was able to help facilitate James, who was fighting for civil rights in DC while Bruce R. McConkie was saying his stuff, do some reconciliation with Charlotte, England. And so I tell that.
Widow.
Yeah, his widow. That just kind of amazing, beautiful moment that we share with James and Judy McConkie as they sit down across from Charlotte and just share their hearts and apologize on behalf of the family. So it's kind of, and then there's a lot of other beautiful essays in there too.
What's the name of the book?
The name of the book is Making Space for Mormon Thought and Culture, The Enduring Influence of Eugene England. Edited by Robert A. Reese and Brent Bushforth.
Nice.
So anyway, okay.
Thank you.
Recess.
We'll take that to school.
So is that a new publication, Jay?
Yeah, no, that just came out.
So it's.
Great, thank you for being here.
It's glad to be here.
Yeah.